Hi, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of the Illusion of Consensus podcast with myself, Rav Arora, independent journalist based in Vancouver, Canada, and Dr. Adeel Khan, who is a Canadian board certified physician and founder of Eterna Health Clinics. He's a leading innovator and clinician in the regenerative medicine space and sort of the integrative space with stem cell therapies. Really kind of challenging the current dominant narratives on mental and physical health. I saw him on Jordan Peterson's podcast and Michaela's, his daughter's podcast, and I was absolutely fascinated with these new frontiers of regenerative medicine that he was talking about. Really like groundbreaking stuff when it comes to chronic disease, when it comes to mental health, depression, obesity, chronic pain, digestion issues. And I'm incredibly fascinated by his work. So I reached out and we arranged this, and we have a lot to talk about on the agenda. And I had a bunch of questions for Dr. Khan that I'm really excited to talk about, but we're going to have to focus our conversation, and it's going to take a bit of a different turn spontaneously. Before we started talking off camera, or before we started recording, we were talking about how Dr. Khan also, when it comes to the COVID vaccines, mRNA vaccine platform, vaccine injuries, very much aligns with the work and the kind of journalism and podcasting we've done here on the Illusion of Consensus. A previous podcast we've done with Dr. Robert Malone, Kevin McKernan, Jessica Rose, who are all experts, critical thinkers in the mRNA vaccine space. And personally, obviously, I'm not an expert, but Dr. Khan has some interesting things to say on that front, as well as with treating vaccine injuries and various issues with the FDA. So while that was not going to be the focus of this conversation, I plan to talk a lot about regenerative medicine, stem cells, treating chronic pain, treating mental health issues, and current issues with the medical system. We might have to bracket that for another conversation, but we're going to start talking about COVID and the vaccine issue, vaccine injuries, because we very much seem to align on that. And I didn't expect that would happen, but I think that's going to be great to talk about for our audience, especially who, our audience is sort of organically built around the illusion of consensus surrounding the pandemic. People that follow myself, the journalism that I've been doing, and Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and his epidemiological research at Stanford, early COVID seroprevalence studies he was doing on infection fatality rate. So we definitely align on this. But I'm excited to get into all this. Thanks so much for coming on, and I'm super excited to talk to you.
Yeah, no, it's we're going to get right into the meat of it. So I think for people to understand, regenerative medicine is essentially combining cell therapy, gene therapy, or gene editing, and tissue engineering. And so I'm an expert in kind of those fields. And to that end, gene therapy is essentially a form of inserting some sort of foreign gene into your body to modify it, usually obviously in a positive way. And so that's why I have some commentary on the vaccine, because it is also a vector that they're using. And so vector meaning is carrying the information that they want to transmit to the cell. And similarly, we have a vector called the plasmid vector that we're using. And so that's why I have some expertise on that, just to give people some context, because I'm not a scientist like Robert Malone in that sense, but I am a clinician scientist, meaning I am doing clinical trials research, and I'm also a clinician seeing patients in real life and seeing how these vaccines are affecting people in a clinical setting. And that, I think, is important to remember too, that there's a lot of undocumented adverse effects that people will never know the true incidence and prevalence of these injuries, because they're just not all going to be reported.
I want to get into all that, but I thought we'd kick off just for a minute quickly, just because it's fun and interesting. So I saw you on Jordan's podcast, which was excellent. I highly recommend people listen to it. I'm going to dig deeper in some of those areas that you guys talked about. I had more follow-up questions from that conversation, but just thought I'd ask, we both know Jordan, and I guess I'm just curious, like, how did you, if you're able to talk about it publicly at all, that is, how did you come to treating Jordan, getting on his podcast? And I guess broadly, we were talking a bit before we started about how you developed this pretty, major network of high performing individuals. You mentioned some other people. I don't know if that's off record or not, but how have you kind of got into the space, and with Jordan especially, but also other people as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of it is public knowledge. Obviously, there's some high profile athletes and celebrities I treat that I can't say, but some of them I can, like Tony Robbins. We have a picture online, and that's open public information. And obviously Jordan, and he commented positively about me and treating his wife and helping fix her chronic pain. So obviously that's public knowledge. But the reason I got connected to him was because his security guard, funny enough, his head of security was a patient of mine, and I fixed him. He had chronic pain, and so he told Jordan about me, and then obviously they got curious. They're like, "Oh, what's this regenerative medicine stuff?" And so obviously we just started talking, and one thing led to another, and then they were open to trying some of the treatments, just because his wife in particular, Tammy, had chronic pain in her elbows and her thumbs for 10 years. And people don't realize, when they think of chronic pain, they're just like, oh, just take a pill and, you just get on with your life. But A, pills are not very good for you. And B, chronic pain does affect much more than just your pain, because it affects your mental health. It affects your ability to do things. It affects your quality of life, and it can affect your fitness and ability to stay active. So, which in turn can deteriorate your entire health. So it's much more than just treating pain. It's actually, to me, it's restoring the body in a very meaningful way. And she said she couldn't even hold hands with Jordan for many years because it was just painful, and she couldn't garden because that was one of the things she loved to do. And so just getting her back to being able to do those simple things was really meaningful to her. And obviously, once they saw that, they obviously started believing in what I'm doing, and that's kind of what led to the podcast interview.
So you were, and maybe we'll get into this again because we want to talk about COVID first, but you were able to successfully treat Tammy, or you're still working on some things?
She's good.
But
she's basically pain-free and functioning normally and doing everything she loves. And that's the beauty of regenerative medicine, which is not ideal for a system that likes to feed itself, because once patients are actually better, they don't need to keep on seeing doctors, which is not the way the system's designed, unfortunately.
That's amazing. And when with Jordan, have you treated him or are treated? I know you. I think
we've done a few treatments for him. I think he's been pretty open, or Michaela has, about his mold exposure. So he had protocols for that, and we've done some intravenous cell therapy treatments like stem cells and natural killer cells to help with his immune dysfunction and chronic inflammation. And he's definitely doing better, and we're probably going to do a few more treatments for him to get him into remission, so to speak. That's the goal. Yeah. Meaning off his pain medications and feeling better in general, just more energy and vitality and all that.
Right. Are you so well, that kind of answers it a little bit, but so you're not just kind of moved on from sort of a experimental
No, we're probably
phase. You've seen a lot of progress with Jordan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like progress for him, but also obviously his wife, and then his son-in-law as well had toxic mold, and we did the follistatin gene therapy treatment for him, which changed his life dramatically, especially because they have a newborn, and just to give him energy and not have that chronic fatigue that people deal with toxic mold all the time. And so they've obviously seen the benefits, and we're going to continue working with them to get do some more treatments for Michaela, most likely as well, like the vagus nerve. We're most likely going to be doing that for her, and then probably do some follow-up treatments for Jordan as well.
And how's the feedback been since that podcast? Obviously, it's a major podcast, and you're kind of getting into the podcast scene, and learning more and more about these things, getting more media exposure, which is fantastic. But have you seen a lot of like an upsurge of clients, more people reaching out, being interested through your podcast?
Yeah, no, for sure. It's actually almost it's hard to believe how many people there are out there suffering with the chronic illnesses and falling through the gaps of the medical system. And it's actually eye-opening, because I didn't even realize there's that many people out there until after doing some of these podcasts, because then it's just like, whoa, you just get a whole bunch of people from all over the world who are just don't have answers to their illnesses. And we have some creative solutions. We just have more tools in our toolbox, because obviously I'm a conventionally trained allopathic medicine doctor, so I know how to treat people within our traditional framework. But obviously I've gone outside of that because I was not satisfied with the solutions we have. And so the outreach has been pretty unbelievable. And it's allowing us to really grow in an organic way, which means it's not like we're marketing to anyone. We're just educating and trying to teach people that there are options and giving people hope. And honestly, a lot of, any extra revenue we're really generating at this point is essentially going back into R&D. So I'm just trying to focus and push this field forward, because I'm not really, it's not, my interest isn't really in just, helping rich people live longer, so to speak, because obviously that's what a lot of people think anti-aging doctors do, because that's part of what I do. But my interest is really mitigating chronic illness and ultimately, hopefully, eradicating it one day with the technology that will be developed with our companies.
Wow! So you're the founder of Eterna Health, right?
Yeah.
Now,
and I'm a co-founder of MiniCircle, which is the gene therapy company.
Right. And at this clinic, I get just kind of a broad, practical question. So are you, I assume you have other people that are also doing, like the vagus nerve injection, stem cells. You have people like, are you dealing with every client or most clients, or are you sort of more directing?
Yeah, it's kind of coming into directing and getting other physicians, because it just becomes impractical. Obviously, you can't treat everyone yourself as much as you want to, and so I have other physicians who are following the protocols and everything that I've developed over the years, and work with other physicians. I think the key too is traveling the world and learning from physicians around the world. Like I've been fortunate to work in Middle East and in Europe, in Asia. And I've kind of taken bits and pieces from all over and kind of synthesized it into a cohesive way, which allows us to bring value to as many patients as possible.
Man, I got a lot of questions, but let's start with COVID. Okay, so we were talking a bit before we started rolling about with vaccines. You've mentioned it a little bit already. I guess we could just start talking about how during the pandemic, I guess I can just talk a little bit about like. I never had any opinions on vaccines before. Then when the vaccine mandates happened in Canada, with the Trudeau government pushing the vaccine mandates, where if you didn't get the jab, you weren't able to fly, you weren't able to go to get on a train. Here in British Columbia, where I am, you couldn't exercise at a gym. Or
if you're a medical doctor, you would lose your license if you didn't get vaccinated, essentially. So it was a very interesting period of time.
Yeah, and that, for me was just like such a powerful education in just how these things work. Like it's real life. It's not theory. It's real life education on, depending on what dimension you're looking at, like the sort of political theory, how authoritarianism, mass formation psychosis, how these ideas become so dominant, how media publications, something I was recently on Russell Brand's show. We were talking about how many of these major media companies were funded by the federal government in the United States. That they paid media companies like the Washington Post, like the New York Post, and CNN, Fox News, etc., to advertise the COVID vaccines, introducing an obvious conflict of interest where media is getting paid to promote the COVID vax, while how can you expect them to honestly cover the COVID vax? I guess
this is nothing new. This is nothing new, right? This is a playbook.
Yeah.
This is a playbook that I think the tobacco industry probably started. Most likely, I think that's where it probably originates from, and everyone else just copied their playbook. So, big food, big pharma, and big oil being probably the three biggest ones. So, meaning they have a playbook that they know. They almost have. It almost seems like they have a template on it, and they know how to kind of create the narrative that they want, and they're very good at that. Obviously, because they have unlimited resources, they have lobbyists, and they have powerful people behind them. The example I always like to use is Tesla, because I was a huge Tesla fan and I was an early Tesla investor. And so big oil, if you were cognizant of what was happening to Tesla from 2015 to 2020, they were basically every headline in CNN, Washington Post, every finance, every hedge fund guy who's apparently the top rated guy, were all saying Tesla's going bankrupt, sell, sell, sell. This is the worst company ever. They're going to fail. And what happened in 2020, right? There was a short squeeze. They were the most shorted stock in history, 33% shorted at one point. That means these companies are betting that the Tesla is going to go bankrupt. And then that also, the reason that's also bad for Tesla is because it doesn't allow them to have raise money as easily because their stock price is so low. And so they almost were, like Elon said, they were 1 quarter away from bankruptcy. They barely got by. And had they not survived, I don't think we would have the electrical vehicle solution revolution that we're having now. And so I think it was the playbook that they have, to me, was it was very obvious when it was happening, because I felt like I was just watching history repeat itself. And that's why I, unlike most doctors, was very skeptical of everything. I wasn't against the vaccine, and I was just thinking we should maybe have a more nuanced approach from day one. And I just never understood why we weren't promoting healthy lifestyle. Why weren't we promoting peptides like in Russia, where they use thymosin alpha-1 and thymulin to literally treat severe COVID? Why weren't we using intravenous stem cells and intravenous exosomes, which have over 40 randomized clinical trials on treating COVID and severe COVID?
Really?
Yeah. So you just PubMed it. PubMed mesenchymal stem cells, mesenchymal stem cells, COVID, and you'll see how many clinical trials there are. And it's just not a single news agency once covered the efficacy of peptides and regenerative medicine for COVID, despite their ease of use, safety data, and honestly cost reduction, because it's actually cheaper for society to do that stuff on a whole if the government was to, as opposed to a lot of these reactionary kind of measures that are done later on. So to me, it was, as I watched it unfold, I was just kind of watching and being like, this reminds me of what was happening with Tesla. So I was just kind of like, this is odd. So that's why I think I had a unique perspective than most doctors. And that's probably why I didn't get sucked into the whole narrative like everyone else did. And it turns out, now we're finding out that, hey, maybe there was some risks that we didn't know about. Were those risks willingly not told, or were they, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But the reality is we know now, for example, we were talking offline about how University of Guelph, which is an Ontario university in Canada, published how there was DNA fragments that are higher than the recommended amount by World Health Organization, WHO, that are allowed to be in the vaccine, particularly Moderna and Pfizer. And so you have these DNA fragments. That means it wasn't purified properly. We're talking about purification that can be done by any science lab by probably an 18-year-old. It just wasn't done properly for whatever reason. And so you have these DNA fragments that are essentially going to be oncogenic, which means they can potentially increase your risk of cancer. And then they're also immunogenic, which means they can stimulate your immune system in ways that we don't fully understand, which can maybe increase the risk of immune dysfunction and autoimmune conditions, which we're now seeing clinically. So there were definitely gaps in the purification. And then the other issue, which we're talking about in the intros a little bit, the vector, the plasmid vector we use is very safe because it's inert, meaning it doesn't stimulate your immune system, and there's no off-site targets. Whereas the lipid nanoparticle vector, you can just Google it. If you look up lipid nanoparticle vector and read about it, you'll find that it can have off-site targets and it can be immunogenic, which means it can migrate and go into other places, and hence why. That's why it goes in cause myocarditis in some people, because it goes to the heart, or in some people it causes kidney issues, or in some people it causes brain issues. Like, you just see all sorts of weird stuff, and it seems like it's just whatever genetic susceptibility or vulnerability people have, the vaccine and the virus itself seem to exploit that, which is why this is a very smart virus, to the point where it makes you question how did it even come to be, right? And because it seems to exploit vulnerabilities in people's bodies that you don't see with other viruses of this, like coronaviruses. Can
you speak a little bit to, and I wish I'd followed this a little more closely, but I wasn't able to at the time. Can you speak a little bit to, if you're aware of this at all, Health Canada's response to the DNA contamination issue? Because I recall something very vaguely that they were not being particularly honest and transparent with that particular issue, and were kind of sidestepping it and downplaying it as a real issue.
I think that's essentially what happens, which is basically saying, oh, it's just one study. It's not enough to prove anything. And when in reality, yes, fine, it is one study, but it's also independent researchers who have nothing to gain by publishing this data. And also, if there is this potential risk, why not explore it more? Why not do an independent Health Canada approved trial, or get the government to fund a study? Like, why are we just watching and waiting to see what will happen? So to me, it's pretty classic, regulatory capture, which is that they get affected by these lobbyists and these pharma companies, and they're just not regulating things the way they should. And I think if regulators really cared about us, they wouldn't allow the processed refined foods that we know are toxic to our bodies, so many of them, to be publicly advertised without warnings. Countries like Japan have banned Kellogg's. Countries like Denmark have regulated what is allowed to be advertised to children when it comes to refined processed sugar. They're not allowed to advertise to children anymore that. Even countries like Mexico, I was just in Mexico last week, they have a warning on every food item that says excessive calories, warning. We don't even have that in Canada or US. So that just shows you, and Mexico, that just shows you the obvious regulation here is not really, they don't care enough about people to protect them. So you have to do your own research and you have to educate yourself and empower your own health. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in.
Let's spend a minute. I'm just curious chronologically, pandemic starts, restrictions come in, right? The masks, lockdowns. If you want to mention anything about that, you can, but particularly with the vaccine mandates, right? Vaccines get enrolled first, seniors are prioritized, then everyone can get it, then everyone should get it, and then everyone has to get it. Otherwise, in BC, you can't work out at a gym, which is insane. You can't get on a flight. I'm just curious, at that time in your profession, how were you seeing this all play out, in real time? What were I guess when you're hearing about the mRNA vaccines, were you just you went into the data fresh and just kind of looked at it and you were concerned about adverse events, or what really disturbed you or alarmed you about what was happening with the approval and distribution and clinical recommendation for mRNA vaccines for not only just older people or immunocompromised, or we can talk about that, but it was literally recommended to everyone. Basically, everyone should be getting this thing, and there was not, bare minimum, not even a conversation about risk benefit analysis in young people versus older people, right?
And yeah, that was my red flag. Basically, my red flag was there was no nuanced approach and there was no discussion of benefits versus harm. Anytime you do a medical intervention, even if it's local anesthetic, even if it's the most simplest benign intervention, you always tell the patient informed consent. You say, this is the potential benefits and this is the potential harm. I never heard that conversation happening with the vaccine, which was very alarming to me. And that's kind of what made me first become a little bit more skeptical. Obviously, I'm not a vaccine expert in a sense. So it's not like I had enough knowledge to say one way or the other, but I was reading as much as I could. So I would read both sides. I would read, there's a blog, your local epidemiologist, who's this infectious disease specialist. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
She's wrong about a lot of stuff, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. And so she was one of my resources, right? And so I was using her, but I was also reading stuff from Robert Malone and I was reading stuff from other people. So I was always trying to look at both sides. And and there was some contradictory stuff. So for me, who's a non-expert, I can't discern whether, who's right in this case. So I'd rather take the more conservative stance and say, hey, maybe there are some risks we don't know about. So let's just caution here for a second. That's what we do in medicine all the time. We always take the cautionary approach. I don't understand why that didn't happen with this. So it's very confusing.
Let me briefly steel man. We don't have to do this, but this might be interesting. The argument was COVID is such a serious risk. So you being conservative as a clinician on the vaccine side, well, what about people dying of COVID? And do you not care about people in the hospitals, elderly people, immunocompromised, even some young people dying of COVID, which I think they lied about, misled about, and deceived the public. But, what about the risk of COVID? So you being conservative on the vaccine side means this is their argument, potentially you could have harmed more people who, died of COVID, who could have been prevented, or their issues could have been mitigated by getting vaccination.
I mean, there's so many interventions that we just talked about that were never talked about, promoted, right? So and these are effective, especially peptides. Peptides are so cheap and they're so accessible. And the fact that they were never talked about once for treating severe COVID, these are published data from Russia. They've shown in multiple studies that thymolin and thymosin alpha-1, these are various peptides that promote your thymus gland function, which is important for immune regulation. And using these peptides can actually avert severe COVID and sometimes and even prevent it. As soon as you get sick, as soon as you get COVID, you start taking these peptides, and it can mitigate the risk of going into severe COVID. But this was never. People should have had a kit at home of peptides and of certain things that they can use right away if they're to get sick. And there's so many other interventions. Even I know, yes, changing your lifestyle is not easy, but we know for sure that obesity and being unfit is one of the biggest risk factors. And in fact, there's a study showing that myostatosis which is fatty infiltration into the muscle. So basically, you don't have enough muscle is one of the best predictors of having severe outcomes, like bad outcomes with COVID. So muscle is super protective. So instead of saying to people, hey, let's close down gyms, why not subsidize personal training and get people moving? Like, there's so many different ways to go about it to augment the other side. Instead, they're just looking at this one, they're just pushing at one lever, which is vaccinate. I'm not saying you don't necessarily have to vaccinate. I'm just saying, why not talk about the other stuff?
Right, and vitamin D.
Exactly. Exactly. Another low hanging fruit. That's easy. And every Canadian's deficient in vitamin D. Like, it's a common. It's like a thing here. So you have to get it, your levels tested, and you have to figure out and optimize your dosing.
So you think every Canadian's deficient, or most, or?
It's the most common micronutrient deficiency by far. That's why we have a higher incidence of autoimmune conditions too.
Right. Well, do you have any standard recommendation for vitamin D?
For Canadians, I think in general it should be 5,000 IU, but there might be some variability because some people don't absorb it that well through the gut, and so sometimes they might have to do injections, or other sources. So you have to. That's why checking your levels is the only way to really know if you're optimizing them. And obviously, even in other parts of the world, like in the Middle East, where people wear burqas and they cover themselves up, and they don't realize that they have all these women have walking around with vitamin D deficiencies because they're covered up all the time. So it doesn't necessarily matter if you're in a sunshine climate either. So that's why you have to really be, you have to get your levels essentially checked and optimized according to that.
Yeah. And do you recommend supplements that combine vitamin D and vitamin K? Because I've heard there's some issues with, if you just take too much D, you could, something calcifies in your blood, something like that?
Usually that's more so calcium, but still, yeah, usually usually the ones I like are D3 and K2 together. And that way, and there's most of the, I'd say, high quality brands now usually put them together anyway.
And the issue is what exactly if you don't do K with it?
You can get buildup of calcium in the blood vessels.
Right. Okay. Is that like pretty common if you're just doing D alone, or is that pretty rare?
It's more so calcium. If you're taking calcium and vitamin D without taking K2, then the calcium can build up in your blood vessels and increase your risk of coronary calcium score, which is a predictor of cardiovascular events.
Oh, but not D itself? If you're just taking D?
It's more so calcium.
Oh, I didn't know that. I've for some reason, I've heard that a lot with just D itself. If you just take vitamin D without K2, you could have
as far as I know, it's calcium. That's the issue. That's why they don't, a lot of, doctors who know what's going on, they usually won't recommend oral calcium supplementation. They'll recommend getting it through dietary sources. Or if you're going to take calcium, make sure you take it with K2.
Right. And do you know, this is, again, this conversation is surely going to bring up a lot of tangents, so we're just going to ride with it. With vitamin D, so both of us, you're Pakistani background, I'm Indian background, which means we're cousins or something, just across the Indian Pakistani border. So, and you're based in Toronto, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're Toronto. I'm Vancouver. Obviously, big South Asian communities here. Do you know much about? I was recently learning about this, and I was maybe thinking about this, like why, like when I was young, I used to get sick a lot, more so than my peers. And I just recently learned that South Asians, and I guess this would also go for Black populations as well. We have lower vitamin D on average than compared to white populations.
Yeah.
Do you know much about this research?
No, for sure. Yeah. Exactly. That's why I have young kids now, and I make sure they take vitamin D every day. And, I think that's just should be a staple for, especially like I said, for Canadians.
Right. Do you know why at all? For first, I guess that there's some sort of adaptation or some, because, India is really hot, or Pakistan, you go across Asia, it's, very, very hot. Here we have, lower temperatures, not as much sun exposure. I assume there's some kind of biological cause there.
Yeah. It's just, our latitude, because we're so far north, even though you think you're getting sunshine because of our latitude, the vitamin D synthesis is actually not as high as you would think, as opposed to if you were like closer to the equator. So that's part of the problem being in the Great White North. Right.
And when it comes to like the average figures, like the South Asians having less vitamin D, or Black individuals having less vitamin D than Caucasians, do you know?
Yeah, no, that's just because of. Yeah, just because the darker skin pigments don't synthesize as much. When the signal that you get from the sun, it stimulates more vitamin D synthesis for lighter skin. So if you're so that's why it's that's why it's a really big issue in Africa, in Muslim countries in Africa, because those women they're dark skinned and they're covered up. So it's actually a pretty big epidemic, I would say, in the Muslim world. Doesn't really go addressed, I would say, still.
Oh, so it's an issue within those countries as well, like putting aside the covering issue. But for
because
like
people think they're near the equator because they think they're getting sun
Yeah.
all the time. But then it's like,
Right.
well, you're wearing a burqa and you're wearing, like a covering, and plus, you have dark skin, so you'd be surprised how many of them are actually deficient.
Well, putting aside the cover up issue, just being like living in Nigeria or Mali, as a individual with darker skin, that's still an issue for vitamin D, even if you're living in a really hot area. That's still.
I mean, if you're
a
not
problem,
covered up, and you're definitely, like, compared to like a light skinned person, you're at more risk. But I mean, if you're in the sun in during the peak hours, even if you're dark skinned, you should get enough vitamin D. You don't need it's not like you need hours. It's just, I don't know the exact number, but I know for Caucasians in general, I think they only need like 15 minutes or something in the sun in peak times. But I know for people who are darker skinned, they need more. I don't know the exact number, but I think it's definitely more than what Caucasians need.
Right. And so you take those people with darker skin, you put them in fucking Toronto or Vancouver in the winter.
Exactly.
That exacerbates it.
Yeah, it's called. It's actually a very interesting theory. It's from a group in Yale talked about that. It's called evolutionary mismatch, and it's essentially there's a mismatch between our genes and our modern environment, and that mismatch is only getting wider because our modern environment is designed for such convenience and for which is great for life, but then it's not matched to our genes, what we evolved to. Right? We evolved to be in the sun. We evolved to play and run. We evolved to eat minimally processed foods. We evolved to go to sleep at a certain time. There's all these things we evolved for, but the modern environment is so mismatched. And if you take a population that's evolved for like India, Pakistan, and then you put them in Canada, you're widening that mismatch. So that mismatch is, so that's a good principle, a guiding framework. If they're unsure about how to decide about health decisions, always think about evolutionary mismatch and evolutionary biology. That can give you a good framework to think about decisions.
Right. Yeah. When you have an Indian immigrant with a turban, with a big hanging beard, shoveling snow in -20 Vancouver or Toronto, there's a mismatch. It's a big mismatch.
Yeah.
What's going on here?
That doesn't belong there. Yeah.
Yeah. That's totally different environments. And I wonder too. I'm going to pivot off this in a sec, but I wonder too, and this is maybe just an individual thing because this doesn't really match up with like all my peers, but I've noticed like I'm very sensitive to cold. I have a really hard time with cold, so I'm sleeping in wintertime, like heaters are on high.
Yeah,
but that's
same.
I think my dad's like that, but not necessarily my mom or other relatives per se living here. So I don't know if that's an individual thing or if that could also be like an ethnic thing. But
there's a gene actually. Well, I don't know if your family has this necessarily, but there are some people who have a gene that makes them resistant to the cold. And so some people are very lucky because they don't get bothered by the cold. And in fact, one of our products that we're going to make in the future is to make a cold resistant gene therapy. So we can add that gene to your body so you're resistant to the cold.
Hit me up, man. Inject it right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's in our product pipeline. It's not a priority right now, but the fact is we can do that, which is really cool.
Yeah, because I remember when I was a kid, like going out to soccer practice evening time, and I'd be just fucking freezing my ass off. Like even when we're running, playing, like it's just freezing, and I'm like suffering. I've like just excruciating, cold. But like no one else there was like suffering to that level. So I was like, what's going on? Why am I so cold when no one else is as much? Per se,
because you belong in India. So,
right? Yeah.
But obviously, some people are lucky. Some people are lucky. Obviously, it's genetics. It's just genetics. Yeah.
Yeah. You think it's genetic, being more sensitive to.
I think you probably had some. I don't know. I don't know if we know the exact gene for being sensitive to the cold, but we do certainly know that there are some people who can be resistant to it, and there's probably some variability in between that. So you might just be on the other extreme of the spectrum. Unless you have some sort of thyroid issue or something like that.
Right. And there's also, again, the mental health stuff. I've got a lot of questions, but I've also heard people, depending on where they're at in terms of their nervous system regulation, potentially if you're more of in a sympathetic arousal. I've heard both things. It's highly individualized from what I understand. Some people in the high sympathetic arousal state, they're overheated. Other people are not as heated and sort of like crave the warmth to kind of calm down the nervous system. For other people with a panic attack, you want the cold water on the face. For me, I tend to be more like I need the heat, but I know other people as well who need like cold during high anxiety episodes or sympathetic arousal. highly
Right,
individualized. It seems to be.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think that's probably the general theme when it comes to that type of stuff. But when the problem when being a sympathetic overdrive for a lot of people is that it can cause cortisol dysregulation, and that cortisol is also important as a kind of hormone in your body because it helps not only to reduce inflammation, it can help if your cortisol is dysregulated, it can not only screw up inflammation, but it can make you tired and wired, so to speak. And so meaning when your cortisol is supposed to be low, it's high, and when it's supposed to be high, it's low. And that dysregulation can lead to a lot of issues with sleep and energy and I would say regulation of the autonomic nervous system and general kind of tolerance to heat and cold. So it's so basically your nervous system is very important for regulating obviously temperature and that's why we do interventions for your nervous system, because we have a lot of people who have autonomic nervous dysfunction where they get these episodes of some people just feel hot all of a sudden, or they feel cold all of a sudden, and that a lot of times is your autonomic nervous system.
Hi everyone. A quick word from our first and exciting sponsor, Alchemy Elements. Alchemy Elements is a powerful adaptogenic supplement. For those of you who don't know, adaptogens are a class of plant compounds, primarily herbs and mushrooms, which can help build the mind and body's resistance to stress. Alchemy Elements contains a very unique and carefully selected blend of 9 adaptogens, such as lion's mane, cordyceps, polygalaroot, and shilajit, and they can help boost energy, boost your immunity, and increase focus and overall stabilize your mood. It can have a wide array of effects, which can often depend from individual to individual, but it's a great way to start your morning and generally increase your focus and your energy levels. You can just pour 1 scoop of Alchemy Elements into your morning coffee or your protein shake or smoothie, and you're off to the races. It's a great way to start the day. I use it every day. I find that it can generally stabilize my mood levels and increase focus, especially if I want to get a big project done or finish a very important task. Alchemy Elements often is a great way to kind of start and get my focus going and get me primed for whatever task I want to accomplish. We're very excited and very happy to work with Alchemy Elements. We've been working with them for a couple of months, and now in this new iteration of the podcast, we're going to continue our relationship, which is very special to us because Alchemy aligns with our mission and values of individuals taking greater ownership of their personal mental and physical health and relying less and less on corrupt and flawed generalized kind of medical advice, and less reliance on pharmaceutical drugs, and more of general interest and focus on holistic health. For a limited time, Illusion of Consensus readers and listeners can get 10% off their first order using the code word illusion, or 30% off a subscription monthly order, where you can get a monthly shipment of Alchemy Elements delivered to you. For the subscription orders, you can also get with it a bonus gold kit to store your Alchemy Elements. Overall, I think Alchemy is a fantastic product. I highly recommend you check them out in the link below in this podcast, wherever you're listening, Spotify, Apple, Substack, Rumble, or YouTube. Just go to the link, use the code word illusion, and you can get your discount and you won't regret it.
Okay, let's table that. Okay, so COVID. Let's get back to that. So where we left off, so the DNA contamination issue, the mRNA platform. I guess if you can expand a little bit more on the issues with the mRNA platform, you already hit on it, but connecting that to then, I want to get into in a sec your clinical practice and the vaccine injuries you've seen there and treatments. We'll get to that, but can you just make that connection for people? So the issues with the mRNA platform and
So I think what I can comment on most is, the lipid nanoparticle vector that they use, as I was saying, and it's the 2 biggest problems is the offsite targets and the immunogenicity, which means it can trigger your immune system to become dysregulated. And just to give everyone a basic overview of your immune system, think about your immune system as, I always say, it's like a teenager that has to go to school to learn how to behave properly. And it's so yeah, you get these cells that get made in your bone marrow, and some of them have to go to your thymus gland, which is where the school is, so to speak, to educate what are called T cells on what to become. So should they become pro-inflammatory signals, or should they become anti-inflammatory signals, or should they become regulatory T cells, which help to mitigate immune dysregulation? And so if that vaccine is unfortunately causing some sort of effect on your thymus gland and on your immune system, which I've seen it clinically, then it can actually lead to autoimmune conditions. And I have physician colleagues who do kidney biopsies, for example, and they've seen so many more people with autoimmune kidney conditions called IgA nephropathy in the last 4 years than they've seen in their entire life. And I don't know if that's the vaccine or the virus or both. It's probably a combination, but either way, there's definitely a correlation that we're seeing in clinical practice with that stuff.
Interesting coincidence. I just got this article in my inbox from the Epoch Times on this topic. Lack of straight answers from Health Canada on COVID vaccines is concerning, Tory MP says. A conservative politician is trying to get answers about the COVID vaccines, but has only received partial responses from Health Canada, including questions about the simian virus 40 DNA sequence in the Pfizer product. This is, I know, a serious issue that many people have raised. The regulator did not directly answer it, this particular issue. Whether itself, it verified the amount of the SV40 enhancer. Health Canada's response in December suggests it doesn't perform these tests on its own, but relies on manufacturer data. So Pfizer and Moderna.
Well, and we just talked about the manufacturers, and we just talked about the purification. So yes.
Yeah. And so Pfizer didn't disclose, I'm just reading this quickly. Pfizer didn't disclose the presence of the SV40 sequence to government regulators like Health Canada. But Health Canada says Pfizer did confirm the presence of it on August 9th after the regulator sent clarification requests during its review of the Omicron booster. But yeah, this is such a just insane pattern of obfuscation and downplaying, not actually addressing these particular issues. Prior to the pandemic, prior to things like this, I would have been like, oh yeah, Health Canada, like of course, like they're an agency devoted to our health. Like we should trust them. Why not? Right.
And that's what everyone thought, myself included. But after the last couple of years, and then after seeing, and then you start digging deeper, right? And it's not just me, right? Yeah. And it's not just us, but there's also a lot of intelligent, independent researchers coming to the same conclusions. There's a really great book called Dissecting by Dr. John Abramson, and he was on Lex Friedman's podcast, and he if you really want to go, so if you really want to go into it, just listen to his 2-hour interview about how the pharmaceutical companies manipulate and how they lobby and peer-reviewed process and all that stuff. So I think you just have to be cognizant that everything you read from regulatory bodies isn't always in the best interest and not without bias.
Right. And I know before we started, I want to get to your clinical practice. Before we get to that, before we started rolling, you were talking a little bit about the general trend with the FDA, their general approach, how they, COVID vaccines has alarmed many people like myself who didn't know much about the FDA, and seeing the way that they recklessly pushed these shots on everyone and continue to push bivalent booster shots, updated boosters on everyone, regardless of risk and benefit ratios. But you were saying something about how the FDA, the deeper issues, there's other drugs that you've looked at as well, which the FDA, similar to the COVID vaccine, have approved absent any tangible risk or with particular side effects that are not being honestly addressed.
Yeah, no, there was a drug called Aduhelm. And it basically, if you Google it and you Google FDA, you'll see that they literally say it was rife with irregularities, the approval of this drug, which basically means like it made no sense. And it was like, how did this drug get approved? Like it barely works. It has all these side effects. And when you dig into it, it's just the person who was getting the approval done happened to work at the FDA before. And so they know the people there and they're able to push this stuff through. Another drug which John talked about too is Trulicity.
Can you repeat? Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that name again? Sorry.
Aduhelm. Aduhelm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at that.
Sorry,
okay.
Helm. Aduhelm. Sorry. Yeah. So it's so that.
Wait, spell it out again. You said G.
Yeah.
There's a G in there.
No, sorry. Aduhelm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so the point is that there's a lot of pharmaceuticals, and just because they get FDA approved, everyone's like, oh, it's FDA approved, it must be good, it must be safe. It doesn't always mean that, and just because it's not FDA approved doesn't mean that either. And that's the field I operate in, right? And that's why I'm in this kind of predicament, I guess, of having to do a lot of treatments outside of North America, because a lot of the treatments we do are not approved by FDA or Health Canada. Despite their safety and despite their efficacy and despite the fact they're approved in many other countries of the world, including Japan, which I always like to use as a reference because the Japanese are a very highly safe and innovative and kind of rigorous culture when it comes to everything, when it comes to cleanliness, when it comes to their food, and they're meticulous about everything they do. So I don't, I always, they approved a lot of these cell therapy treatments over a decade ago, which are still technically not allowed in Canada or US. So that to me just shows you that it's not to do with safety or efficacy. It has more to do with politics.
And follow up on that, I guess, what's your view, if you have any opinions to share on, say, psychiatric drugs approved by the FDA? I believe, I might get this name wrong, but an SSRI was approved last year for kids. I think Lexapro, or it might be a related one. But it was approved basically for, I think, kids under 16, even though the studies showed something like an elevated suicide risk and not clear long-term data on that yet. That's been FDA approved, and now psychiatrists can recommend these drugs to kids. And increasingly, my generation, Gen Z, struggling with a whole host of things, ranging from gender dysphoria to ADHD, depression, suicidality, social media. Like, there's all these issues related to it. Do you have a general view on psychiatric drugs that are promoted, SSRIs in particular?
Yeah, I mean, there was a TED talk about this, I feel like a decade ago, that talked about the publication bias of SSRIs, which is that if you take all the negative trial results, which are many of them are not published, and you collate them all together, then SSRIs are not more effective than placebo, and there's so much harm and risk with them, versus something like exercise, which has no harm and is just as effective, if not more effective, than SSRIs. And not to say that exercise is a solution for everyone, but the point is there are interventions that can be talked about, and there are other things that we can do as well, that we do ourselves with our interventions, that have no harm and no risk with them, versus these medications, and they don't get the same attention because we don't have that ability that these pharmaceutical companies have to kind of get these headlines and get those medications to all the big media outlets and get those FDA approvals. They know how to play the game, right? And that game is just like how big oil. I always come back to Tesla because big oil played it with Tesla. They know how to craft the narrative in a very systematic way. And it's the name of the game for them, obviously, because it's about money and profits. It's not necessarily about helping people or putting them into remission or actually solving problems. It's just about managing them.
Now, the dominant theory on SSRIs, the mode of action was the serotonin imbalance, right? Correcting the serotonin imbalance by taking SSRIs, which was debunked. So there's that. But then you talked to Jordan on his podcast, and I've heard this from other clinicians. There's a vast array of clinicians, some reporting different things, but even Jordan was saying, though, which I'm kind of confused about, I guess, about how, for many or some of his clients that he gave SSRIs to, it did tremendously help them. Like, I'm not sure, like, if the serotonin theory has been debunked, I don't know what the motive, is it just placebo, or like, there are many cases I've heard of where people, they're in this very dark, depressive phase and they take an SSRI and it uplifts them out of that. So what's going on? I don't know. Do you have any insight?
I don't know I'm not sure the exact reason, but I think I read a paper, if I'm not mistaken, about how SSRIs can have an anti-inflammatory effect too. And so similar to how statins for cholesterol, the benefit may not be so much related to the lowering of the cholesterol, it may be just the reduction of inflammation. And there's much more data supporting that with statins now too, with, for example, if you have chronic kidney disease patients and you give them a statin, it doesn't actually affect their mortality or help them, even if they have high cholesterol, because the chronic inflammation from the chronic kidney disease is still a problem. And so I think similarly, we know that neuroinflammation is a problem in a lot of these psychiatric illnesses. And there might be and especially in those patients who feel a huge difference, like really immediately, I think it's probably mediated by some sort of inflammatory modulation. But again, your SSRIs may not be the best way to do that because there's side effects with them and there's risks, and there's other ways to reduce neuroinflammation without having those risks. And if we want to talk about the mechanistic basis of depression, neuroinflammation is one. The other big one is the gut-brain axis. We know there's more serotonin receptors in your gut than there is in your brain, and the communication between your gut and brain is a real thing. And so, and then the nervous system as well. So the nervous system, the body keeps the score, right? And it's kind of where unresolved emotional trauma and where a lot of mental health issues come from is actually stored in your nervous system. And if you can modulate or kind of reset that, then that's to me is a much more holistic and comprehensive way to treat mental health. And that's kind of the approach we take in our clinical practice.
Yeah. I want to dig so much into that. That's super fascinating to me. And one follow up too. I mean, on psychiatric drugs, like, are you generally opposed to the kind of current conventional system where increasingly my generation is being medicated with Adderall and Ritalin for showing up with ADHD, inability to focus?
You're just not looking at the whole there can be toxins, there can be so many other factors that are contributing to these conditions. Like I said, gut health, neuroinflammation, there can be toxins, micronutrient deficiencies. There can be so many other things contributing that don't get looked at. And then you're just kind of giving a pill instead of trying to figure out the underlying cause. And I'm not blaming doctors, because doctors have 15 minutes in an appointment and they have to just do what they do to manage the patient. It's the system that's broken. And the system is designed in a way where it's essentially makes it impossible for a primary care physician to really make a meaningful impact because of the way it's designed.
Right. Okay, before we branch out into your practice, regenerative medicine, I have a lot of questions there, both physical and mental health. Let's return to your clinical practice and the treatment, or I'm curious about the I guess volume too, like vaccine injuries. You said you're happy to talk about that. You've seen a lot of patients with vaccine injuries. Like, is it dozens, hundreds? Like, have you seen a large? And I'm also curious too. And I'm also curious too, is there a bit of a selection there too? As in, like, does your clinic kind of offer more solutions so you see more vaccine injury patients?
No, I've never once advertised that I treat vaccine injuries. I've never, and I don't. So these patients are just ending up with me because they don't know where else to go. And the other doctors, they've gone to Harvard, they've gone to Mayo Clinic, they've gone to Johns Hopkins, they've gone to all these institutions, and they have no solutions for them. And we're the only ones actually providing these people with solutions, because we're trying to look at what I call first principles medicine, which is like, trying to look at the fundamental drivers or hallmarks of cellular dysfunction and trying to restore those. So it's a different approach, which it comes from functional medicine, but looking at it more from a cellular dysfunctional perspective and cellular pathways and trying to restore those, which is a lot of cellular biology, which doctors are, they're like traumatized from memorizing that stuff in medical school. So most of them just don't want to think about it. But that's why it's, unfortunately, most doctors just don't know how to approach it. But half the patients I saw today, were vaccine injuries, which is kind of sad to see. And most of them are young, and they're healthy before, and now they're having end stage kidney disease. The youngest I saw was 23, and he had mild kidney. Yeah, right. And so, and he has kidney dysfunction, but he also has chronic fatigue. He has joint pain. He has brain fog. And there's no pill for these problems, right? How do you fix brain fog? How do you fix chronic fatigue? You can't give them a pill and be like, here, you're better now. So doctors literally don't know what to do with these patients. And what we're doing is we're trying to say, okay, what's the actual cellular reason as to why you're having this, and how do we restore that? But the point is, there's no other indication in the history and in the assessment to say that this came from anywhere else. Like, it's pretty clear as day that, they were fine. They got the vaccine, and then a couple of weeks later, they started having blood in the urine, or they started having some issue, So it's to me, it's like, what else could it be? Because I know a lot of doctors may say, oh, it's not the vaccine, it could be something else. But I just don't. If there is something else, sure. I just don't know what else it could be in this context.
And volume. So you've been treating patients throughout COVID, is that right?
Yeah, we were. I mean, during COVID, I was mainly working more as a sport. I mean, I'm a sports doctor by training, and so I was primarily doing interventional procedures and injections. But then my practice kind of evolved in the last year or two because of just the need, I guess, of seeing all these people who aren't getting help, and I just felt like I wanted to help more people, and I thought I could come up with some ideas and solutions to help them. And it's panned out pretty well because obviously we're having a lot of innovative treatments that are helping a lot of people who are otherwise don't have any solutions.
So how many volume? I'm curious about. Question number one: How many vaccine injuries have you? Like, is it dozens or hundreds? Like, a lot of people coming to you with
no, it's definitely getting into the hundreds now because it's just
wow.
It's just so common. And like I said, it's not like they're going on VAERS, and reporting their vaccine injury. It's not like they're doing that. So, like, how will we ever actually know what the real
and why aren't they doing that? I mean, for people who don't know the complications with VAERS, can you just expand on that for a second? Why are there injuries not being reported to VAERS?
I mean, I actually don't know. Well, I guess because I guess their primary care physician's supposed to do it or something. Like, I don't know the process exactly, but
right, yeah. I mean, yeah, I've talked to physicians about this who've been outspoken on this, and they say doctors don't have a lot of time. There's a lot of paperwork you have to fill out, and there's sort of a cultural or sort of medical sort of consensus that like vaccines are safe and effective. You're recommending them, right? So if you're a doctor who's recommended the COVID vaccine to everyone, to most people, you're seeing all these people coming in with these issues. A, it's a lot of work. B, is it really the vaccine? Maybe it could be something else. What are your best interests there? Are you going to spend more time and go down this route? And theoretically, I don't know the politics of medicine. Like I know that's real. I know people who've spoken out even very mildly and have been reprimanded. So, is that going to potentially put a target on your back? All these incentives against
exactly.
Reporting VAERS.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it has to go the other way, right? There has to be an incentive to the physician to report it, but I doubt that will ever happen.
So you've seen hundreds of individuals with vaccine injuries. I guess, yeah, I'm just very, very curious about this. Generally, age, and what kind of conditions generally, and I assume it spans a lot, but
it spans the whole gamut, right? Like you can have young, healthy people who previously had no medical history, and all of a sudden now they're in the medical system and they're just seeing doctor after doctor without answers. And then there's other people who are older, 60s or 70s, and they had some medical conditions before, but now they just got extremely worse, or they developed a new condition, or they're starting to see sudden deterioration in their chronic disease that was stable for years. So there's so much variability in how it presents. But I think the biggest theme that I'm seeing is definitely immune dysregulation, which is that kind of whole system I was talking about with educating your immune cells and telling them how to behave properly. And so your immune system is this very amazing but highly complex system that basically, when it becomes dysregulated, it can lead to all sorts of issues, which is why it's such a low-hanging fruit from an interventional perspective. If we can restore your immune system or reset your immune system, that can be very powerful. Because right now, if you go to, let's say you got the vaccine and you develop rheumatoid arthritis or some sort of autoimmune condition afterwards, which I've seen, and you go to your rheumatologist, who's a specialist, they're just going to say, okay, well, now you have this condition, so take this drug for the rest of your life. That's going to suppress your immune system. And then that's going to have side effects of increasing risk of cancer and depleting your body of nutrients. And funny enough, the most profitable drug now is an immunosuppressant called Humira. It makes something like $23 billion. So it surpassed statins. So immunosuppressants are becoming more profitable than any drug in history, which just shows you the situation we're in with this it's an epidemic of immune dysregulation.
And yeah, I'm curious more to drill down on this for a few more minutes. I guess there's so many questions I have about this. Okay, one area that I've written a lot about. It's one thing Jordan knows about, other people know about, Joe Rogan knows about. So one of the things I reported on, I would say earlier on than sort of at least mainstream journalists who didn't even report on it to some degree, and sometimes when they did report on it, they didn't do it accurately. The myocarditis issue, that was something that I covered pretty heavily, and a lot of people know I covered it. Are you seeing a lot of patients with myocarditis, pericarditis?
Yeah. So what I see a lot of athletes too, and so I'm finding that the concern amongst athletes more so is that they're seeing, they have friends or people that they know who are having sudden deaths, which is very odd. And I don't know if it's a vaccine or what it is,
Okay.
but the fact is there is more anecdotal evidence, I guess, of people just saying that this is happening. And like one of the patients I talked to today, he's a tennis player, and one of his buddies who's a tennis player just died a couple of weeks ago, from a sudden heart, basically cardiac arrest. So it's very, it's obviously distressing because we don't really know why this is happening.
Yeah, I mean, one of the major concerns about the whole myocarditis issue was that potentially, given, and I've looked at this deeply, I don't know if you've looked at these data sets in Thailand, I'm forgetting the other country, but Thailand, they did a study on subclinical myocarditis, and it showed something like 2 to 3% of young adolescents, male and female, I believe, had evidence of subclinical myocarditis, elevated troponin levels, which means that they may not actually be symptomatic, but they have evidence of subclinical myocarditis. And there's no one's testing it. Like, who's testing for that? No one. So
yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
potentially
that's what I mean. There's so many things that fly under the radar, and that's the same thing with a lot of this immune dysregulation and chronic fatigue and brain fog, because there aren't really great tests for a lot of that stuff either. Like, you may not have overt autoimmune condition, but you may have some sort of immune dysregulation that develops after the vaccine that isn't being picked up on the traditional testing. And that I see that all the time as well. And it's just like, these patients are like, oh, all the tests are normal, MRI is normal, blood work's normal, and then they're just kind of told it's in their head, which is very, it's just sad, because these patients deserve better, obviously, and then they do become depressed, and they develop mental health. How can you not develop a mental health issue when you're suffering with chronic disease, and then you're told it's in your head? It's really, it's really sad.
So I asked you about myocarditis, but it sounds like at your particular clinic, you're not seeing a lot of myocarditis.
I wouldn't say that's because I'm not a cardiologist, so it's not like I see that stuff all the time. I do,
of course.
But I do have patients who have histories of that and are looking to kind of restore their immune system back to normal because of the myocarditis that they got related to the vaccine or the ongoing issue. And I've had a few cases of that where we've been able to successfully treat them and get their heart function back to normal and everything. So
really, no way. I almost don't believe that.
Yeah, I know.
Really. Okay. Okay. First question on that is does that cohort primarily lean younger, healthier, and male?
Yeah.
That's generally.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly what you just said. Yeah.
Really? Okay. And are we? Yeah. Again, I don't know if you have the numbers, but like, are we talking dozens of people, or less than that?
Probably dozens. Definitely not like hundreds or anything.
Yeah.
Like
okay.
Well,
that's a lot too. So you've treated dozens of individuals with vaccine myocarditis.
Yeah. Most of them get. And what they do is, we do intravenous stem cells for them. A lot of the stem cells get trapped in the lungs, but then they go to the heart as well. And so what I've seen is, it's not just a myocarditis, is that some of them actually get decreased ejection fraction or decreased heart function. So that's kind of what we're trying to restore.
Okay. And stem cells work for that? You can restore heart function with stem cells? Really?
Yeah, ejection, heart failure. There's a trial published in JAMA, which is a big kind of medical journal last year, and they showed culture expanded stem cells that was from bone marrow specifically, but they injected them directly into the arteries that go into the heart, and had a significant impact on restoring heart function. And I've seen it obviously clinically as well. With we have an interventional radiologist on our team for that reason. He injects the stem cells directly into the arteries that feed into the heart or into different organ systems. That's what we do for a lot of our IgA nephropathy patients too. who get kidney issues after the vaccine or, stuff like that. I'm not, obviously, again, I don't want to make it seem like it's always related to the vaccine, but we do definitely, but the fact is we are seeing patients with this in real life, and it's sad. And it just sucks because I feel like it could have been prevented. And, a lot of these patients just, they don't know where to turn because like I had a patient today she's waiting for a kidney transplant now because she's on dialysis because of she was vaccine injured in 2022. And her kidney has just deteriorated ever since then.
Wow. Yeah. And, so one thing that in my journalism, in my writing, I've reported on a couple of stories and the data more broadly, the studies on vaccine myocarditis. And I recently followed up on one person, and then I heard about another story that I'm going to be covering in a piece. One individual who I wrote about a couple of years ago, vaccine myocarditis, he was also happened to be South Asian in law enforcement, close to my area, got after the second Pfizer shot, almost died of a heart attack. His heart rate was something crazy, just exploded out of his chest. Thankfully, the ambulance came right away, and he was very close to a hospital with a specialized cardiology unit. And they somehow, which incentives seem to be in the other way, but they quickly diagnosed it as vaccine related myocarditis. And he was basically told not to work for several months. Couldn't work in law enforcement, couldn't exercise, couldn't even, I think, driving, going upstairs, stuff like that.
So those are the type of patients we help. Yeah. But
yeah. So, and so I followed up with him recently, and I was hoping that he would have some progress, but he told me, well, yeah, I saw progress. I was told I could go back to work slowly, but recently in December, he had a few bizarre cardiac episodes that landed him in the hospital, some irregular heartbeat, something going on, and doctors don't know what the fuck to do with him. And they're like, like something vaccine related maybe, but they don't have answers. He did follow the conventional course for whatever medications that could help with myocarditis, decreasing physical activity, and then I guess doing certain cardiac testing and eventually going back to activity. But he still has some lingering issues that doctors with conventional treatments don't know what to do.
Yeah. And the part of the problem is with long COVID or with vaccine injury, both of them also lead to vagus nerve dysfunction. And the vagus nerve we talked about, but it also does innervate your heart, right? And so if your vagus nerve is not, it becomes dysfunctional, it can increase the risk of getting arrhythmias and getting problems there as well. So, if I was to treat someone like him, I would try to restore his nervous system in addition to obviously restore his, try to get his immune system to function normally as well. So, that it's a difficult case, but those are the type of cases we see all the time.
That's so interesting to me. So you've had dozens of patients come in with myocarditis, and I don't know how specifically you can speak to this, but have you treated them all successfully or semi-successfully or making progress?
Yeah, so most of them aren't coming in the acute phase. They're coming in the chronic phase, like your friend. Like they have, for example, they're having shortness of breath. They can't run anymore. Their heart function might have decreased a bit. They might be getting palpitations. And we've had lots of patients like that we've helped. It generally is successful. The only variable I would say is sometimes they might need more than one treatment. But we can pretty much get every, like I never like to say anything's 100%, but we can get most everyone better sometimes they just need multiple treatments, but one treatment for many people does the trick.
That is so fascinating to me. So, but in terms of time, we're talking about like months or maybe even years after vaccination, after they got the myocarditis. You're saying longer term?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And so they've I guess maybe tried conventional paths and they just cardiologists don't. They say myocarditis and this is part of the propaganda in my opinion was it's self-resolving. It'll just heal itself, and that's there's not much.
Doesn't always happen. Obviously, I've seen that. You've seen that. You hope it would resolve itself, but it doesn't always happen.
And so with one or two stem cell treatments, you're saying
for people, and then sometimes we do the vagus nerve as well if they have like the palpitations or the nervous system dysfunction.
Yeah, and you're seeing full recovery. You're saying most of the time, or almost always.
In fact, one of the patients was literally the thing you just described. He was an officer here in Ontario, and he had the almost exact same story as your friend.
Really? So you treated him?
Yeah, and he's back. He's like, we didn't even do direct injection for him. His was just an IV and the vagus nerve, and he's 100% back to normal, running, doing everything. like you would.
Stem cells through the IV?
Yeah. And then the vagus nerve kind of reset.
So you've treated everyone Is it everyone or almost everyone? Because I'm just thinking critically here. Like, is this seems like a highly effective? It seems too good to be true.
I know, and that's what the thing with the only variable. Like I said, most everyone does get better. It's just sometimes people may need additional dosages or additional treatments. Because if you think about it, once you understand the underlying mechanisms, it's just a matter of, okay, how do we actually get the body to be back to the way it was? And that's kind of the whole idea of regenerative medicine, right? Regenerative just means repairing cellular dysfunction or repairing damaged tissue to a previous state. So that's the whole principle of what we're trying to do. And we can do it successfully.
And can you, obviously you're not a cardiologist, but you've treated people. So like, can you expand a little bit? So myocarditis, people have heart inflammation or pericarditis, inflammation along the lining of the heart. But obviously, as you know, I've done Brett Weinstein's podcast, and we've talked about my reporting on this. And one of the things he says, and other people say, is that myocarditis is kind of just a surface level analysis. There's deeper, something you referred to, immunological dysregulation. There's something going on, the spike protein mismatch.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how are
it's a chronic inflammation? Then? It's a chronic inflammation, right? It's where's that inflammation coming from? It's coming back to the lipid nanoparticle that's having offsite targets and being immunogenic and causing your immune system to become dysregulated. And that's what's causing the inflammation. And then that causes inflammation around the heart. So we have to restore the immune function to normal. And that's what peptides, bioregulators, and stem cells, that's kind of the mixture, that the concoction that we use to basically reset the immune system by treating the gut, by treating the thymus gland, and by treating obviously the inflammation in the heart as well. But the treatment is holistic in the sense that you're trying to repair the underlying issue that caused it in the first place, which is immune dysregulation. Oh,
so with your myocarditis patients, you're not just doing the stem cells in the heart, you're doing other stuff
most
too?
Of them. Well, exactly. That's why we're doing. So we do something called bioregulators, which a bioregulator is basically it's like a peptide, but it's for an organ function. And a peptide, the most famous peptide is insulin. It was made like 100 years ago, right? And so now we have designer peptides that can work on specific cell functions. But then we also have something called bioregulators, which can work on organ systems. And so your thymus gland, like we're talking about, is kind of like a master regulator for your immune system. And it can become dysfunctional after, with long COVID or with the vaccine injury. And so we have to restore that. And the way we do that is by using these peptides and bioregulators that act on the thymus gland. So we use that in combination with the intravenous stem cells. And intravenous stem cells, because a lot of people think when they think stem cells, they think, regeneration, rebuilding. But actually the stem cells are signaling molecules, mesenchymal stem cells specifically, which are the type that we use from umbilical cord tissue. So they're signals. They're just signals that help to re-educate or retrain your immune system. So the fancy word is to say immunomodulation. So basically, we're restoring your immune system to the way it was before the vaccine injury. And that's the whole idea. So it's like, I like to think of it like, we're doing a nervous system reset and then we're doing an immune system reset. So that's the whole idea of how we're trying to restore your body back to the way it was before all this happened.
Right. And I myocarditis is of particular interest to me as a young person who reported on this. I want to branch out into the autoimmune, and I assume there's overlap, but generally with myocarditis, so you're doing, can you just outline a little more precisely what the course of treatment would be? So you're doing which exact?
So basically, usually we're going to do about 4 weeks of peptides, which are going to be different peptides that are going to work on the gut, work on the thymus gland. And then you're going to do the intravenous stem cells. And then after the stem cells, and we may do the vagus nerve too, depending on the case. And then after the stem cells, we do peptides afterwards to enhance their immunomodulatory effect. And then we also do something called a thymus bioregulator, which helps to upregulate the function of the thymus gland to help promote your immune regulation. Because there's something called T regulatory cells. So T regulatory cells are these cells in your body that help to regulate your immune system. And we know with vaccine injury and with long COVID, those T regulatory cells aren't able to regulate anymore, right? And that's what leads to the dysfunction. So we're trying to upregulate the thymus gland so that you can promote function of these T regulatory cells to control and mitigate the risk, or kind of, undo the harm that happened. The whole treatment takes like 2 days, really. But the protocol is like 2 to 3 months of, peptides, bioregulators, all that. But it's not like, it's not like it takes years or something to restore the body back to normal. So most patients can notice a significant difference within a few weeks to months after the treatment.
So the 4 weeks of the peptides, and then what was after that again?
Then you come in for the actual treatment of the intravenous stem cells and potentially the vagus nerve as well, which is, for the nervous system dysfunction. And then afterwards, there's peptides and the bioregulators that you do for another month or so.
Okay, and the stem cells, that's for the heart specifically, or for other areas too?
It's just so when you do them intravenously, most of them get trapped in the lungs. But what they do is when they get trapped in the lungs, they interact with something called BALT, BALT. It's basically bronchial alveolar lymphoid tissue. So that lymphoid tissue is kind of a gateway to your immune system. So it helps to basically train your immune system from a pro-inflammatory state into an anti-inflammatory state, and it helps to regulate your immune system so that you don't have that immune dysfunction anymore. So the stem cells do go from the lung, and they do go to the heart. So there's obviously going to be a local effect of reducing inflammation in the heart, but more importantly, it's going to be helping to regulate your immune system, which I think is the underlying cause as to why you got myocarditis in the first place.
Right. Oh, so but weren't you saying before that you're also targeting the stem cells to the heart as well? Is that in addition to that, or is that?
So it's case by case. So we have an interventional radiologist on our team, for example, who will inject stem cells directly into the heart. But usually we'll do that. Obviously, it's a more invasive procedure. So unless they have significantly decreased ejection fraction or heart function, we're not going to jump straight to that. Usually we'll do the IV and the least invasive stuff first. And then if they don't get better from that, then we might go to something more invasive.
Wow, that's so interesting. So it goes to the lungs? So you're injecting into the lungs, or?
No, just intravenous. Like, you know how you get IV vitamin drips?
Oh, okay. Okay,
it's literally just IV.
But you said
when
it goes to the
IV,
lung.
yeah, when you go IV, the stem cells first go to the lungs, and a lot of them get trapped there. But then they spread out from the lungs to your heart, and then they get pumped to everywhere else in your body.
And can you just? I apologize for making you repeat anything, but I know nothing about this. I'm learning. So what's what does it do to your immune system when you do that?
It helps to regulate or increase the tolerance of your immune system. So it helps to restore it. It's called macrophage polarization, which is a word for saying that it's training your white blood cells to send the right signals. So because after long COVID or vaccine injury or chronic or autoimmune conditions in general, you have too much inflammation, right? And so we want to control that inflammation by sending the right signals. And that's what stem cells help to do. They help to reprogram the cells. So that's why this is a long-term solution, because it's actually retraining your immune system. It's not just suppressing it.
Wow. So then again, the specific example of myocarditis, which is obviously, relatively common, for young people with the vaccines, rates of like 1 in 2,000, 1 in 3,000, probably higher given the subclinical issue that I mentioned. Many individuals who don't know that they had any kind of heart issue, but that sudden death issues, like maybe they had elevated troponins before that were not detected and they didn't have symptoms, and suddenly, they're running at, the maximum heart rate or near maximum, and there could be an issue, right? Sorry, my question was going to be, so that indirectly could help the heart then, from what you're saying. So that sort of immune reset.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that could help with those individuals.
Yeah, because they have chronic inflammation, which is rooted in immune dysregulation, and we're restoring that immune dysregulation by re-educating your immune system with the systemic treatments of peptides, bioregulators, and stem cells.
And then those stem cells, you're saying, would then interact, so particularly with people with the myocarditis, would interact with the heart muscle and potentially restore, function there, or any kind of inflammation there as well.
Yeah, exactly. If you have inflammation in the heart ongoing, it'll help with that as well.
Wow. And I just have to be again, so much of what you do, by the way, just, obviously you're in this world, but from the outside, so much of what you do, and not just this, like listening to you on Jordan's podcast, it seems too good to be true. It almost, I'm not saying this, but it almost seems like there's got to be something shady. Like there's no way. Like it gives that. It's just,
I know. And the stem cell, well, it's a good point, because the stem cell industry is full of shady clinics, because a lot of them are practicing in the unregulated areas, right? Or loosely regulated. And so they're doing a lot of things that they shouldn't be. And they're not really doing best practices, and they're just trying to run a business. And, to me, it's like, that's why I'm, obviously I don't, there's no one on the planet in terms of like a business that's also doing as much research as we are when it comes to not only running
Really?
a clinic but also doing research when it comes to cell therapy and gene therapy and all that stuff. Just because we're investing, like most stem cell clinics don't invest their money in research; they just take those profits home. They don't care to do more research, right? So, but we're trying to actually push the field forward and trying to help make this legitimate by showing the data and showing the clinical trials and all that stuff.
Yeah. So many more questions on this topic alone. So are you tracking then? Like, so when you say you're successfully treated this particular subset of vaccine injuries?
Yeah. So we actually we just hired a chief technology officer. And so we're just working on the data sets right now and getting all that system built in so we can do it automatically and eventually apply machine learning and have better predictive models of who the best candidates would be and all that stuff. But obviously that's going to take time. But we obviously have a patient registry and data that we have access to, and we've published some of it, but we're going to put in together in a more cohesive way, and make it and try to automate it as much as possible, so we can easily pull the data and show people. But I think at the end of the day, we need we're still not, we need large clinical trials to really convince mainstream medicine. But my argument to that is that we know that this stuff is very safe, right? Like whenever you have these pharmaceutical drugs that we were talking about, like Aduhelm, which got approved, even though it barely works and it has all these side effects, but it still got approved by FDA and it has all these harms. These interventions, like especially intravenous stem cells, like there's hundreds of studies on them. And we know they're so safe. And so at least we know there's no harm by doing these treatments. So to me, that's number one, is safety. So at least if you're not causing harm, then it should be the bar to approve these treatments shouldn't be the same as something that's going to suppress your immune system and increase the risk of cancer, because this has such a higher safety profile. But that's not the way FDA has taken a stance on it. So they're highly regulating stem cells and making it difficult for approval.
I really want to ask about that. And I know we talked about time. So like 15, 20 more minutes. Is that fine? I know you had a 8 o'clock as well. Yeah. Okay. This is fine. So many more questions. And we're not doing any of the questions that I wrote down. So that's going to be...
I bet.
Yeah, I was going to ask all about the vagus nerve injection, chronic pain, the different areas of medicine, holistic medicine, integrative, regenerative, etc. But okay, so we're talking about vaccine injuries. So the question I was going to ask you a minute ago, or I tried asking you, was about, do you have good long-term data? So like with the particular subset of myocarditis, and I'm going to step outside for a second, or in a second, to talk about the other vaccine injuries. But for that particular subset, when you say you successfully treated those individuals, is that
we usually do like a 6 month? We do a 6 month and 1 year follow up, and the patients that we've treated with like those heart issues I was talking about, like they're all doing well. But it's not like it's not like we have hundreds, right? So, to me, it's a risk versus benefit. So we have these patients, let's say we have like 20 patients or something, and we know that this intervention has worked for these 20 patients and it caused no harm. They're doing well. So why can't, to me, it should be somewhere in the thought process for these doctors to say, hey, why not consider this as an option that has low risk and has a big potential upside, especially when there's not you might probably know more than I do. What other options are there anyway? What does a cardiologist do if a patient is suffering with this? As far as the patients I've seen, they've all gone through, they've seen multiple cardiologists and they've seen multiple doctors and they're not given any answers. So to me, it's like, why not try this? Right. And especially if it's safe and there's a track record of having patients who've successfully been treated. So to me, it almost doesn't make sense that they don't want to recommend it, but.
Right. So you've done the 6 month, 1 year follow ups. I feel like I'm going to do an article on this. By the way, this is so interesting. Like this should be highlighted. I think I'm going to write about this.
Well, I guess I didn't realize you're like a myocarditis expert, so obviously it's near and dear to your heart.
Yeah. No pun intended. This is just one of the areas that I've reported on, and I've in all my reporting, which isn't like a super extensive, but it's extensive enough that that's kind of one thing I wrote a lot about. I never found any semblance of treatments, anything really effective at restoring, other than it's probably self-resolving. You can go back to your activity in a few months and you should be fine. I haven't seen much more than that.
We could even have your friend come down and do like a whole video with him and document the whole process. I think that'd be very powerful. and just document his journey and show his whole story and show, and I think a story can be so much more powerful than, just showing
100%.
someone going through it from beginning to end. Because, I think that can be really show people, right?
Let's talk more about that. Once we're finished here, I think there's some good. That's a really good idea, actually, and not just for that, but for other things as well, like the vagus nerve thing. There's could be some interesting video journalism we could do on that. That'd be fascinating. Yeah. So I can't emphasize enough. Okay, are you you seem very you're an honest person, you're an ethical person, you're very confident that this is you're on kind of the frontier for treating vaccine injuries? You're seeing a lot of success, seems to be. Are you still learning? Are you still figuring stuff out?
I don't know if I can say his name. I don't know if I'm allowed to say his name, but he's a billionaire who donates to Stanford. His name's on a few buildings there. He has long COVID and potential vaccine injury. Again, it's hard to discern which one's which, or maybe it's both.
Right.
And so this guy has been to every doctor, he literally, has been to 20 doctors, and I'm just in the process of treating him because I treated one of his friends who's a A-list celebrity. I wish I could say her name. He said if I can fix him, he'll donate $30 million to us to do research for long COVID and all this stuff that we're doing. So obviously, there's people who are out there who are willing to fund our treatments to really do more research. So I'm hoping that'll happen. But the reason I'm confident is because I fixed his friend, who's an A-list celebrity, who had the same issues. She had vaccine, the long COVID, all that same stuff we were talking about. Not so much the heart issues, but the nervous system, brain fog, chronic fatigue, all that stuff, right? And so we fixed her. And so obviously then she referred him, and because he's been to every doctor too. And so I'm very confident we're gonna be able to help him as well. And then hopefully we'll be able to do some large trials and with his money and everything, and, start to move the narrative.
Yeah. So, again, what you're saying, given the communities that I've operated in with sort of contrarian space of, people like Jay Bhattacharya, Jimmy Dore, people, alternative media space, Russell Brand, Rogan, listening to, I've been a part of the space for a while now, a couple of years, and listening to just so many different thinkers, so many scientists and epidemiologists, vaccinologists in this area. What you're saying right now, I haven't heard of once before. And if what you're saying is true, or, even mostly true, that could change that whole space. So what you're saying, the significance of this is pretty massive given the discourse, and just Joe Rogan, he became such a big platform, is such a big platform. Every couple episodes, a couple episodes ago with the comedian Donnell Rawlings, he was talking about the COVID vaccine, and they were talking about issues with it. He's pretty plugged into this stuff and was, a big part of this, but I don't think even he's heard of any of what you're saying right now. This doesn't seem.
Because I'm looking at it from an interventional clinical perspective, but I also have the science background, so I have a unique perspective and I have a unique skill set because of the training I've had, and also I'm an interventionalist at heart, which means I'm always trying to look for procedures or things I can do to help my patients. And so I'm always looking at it from that perspective. And I don't think a lot of doctors are, they're not trained in that to think that way necessarily. So I think that's why I'm doing, obviously, and I think that's the reason why I'm having all these people gravitate towards me, obviously, not just high net worth people, but a lot of high profile people, because they can see that I'm helping patients that no one else in the world is able to help. Not to say that I'm that I'm necessarily the best or something. It's just I'm just putting together a lot of pieces of the puzzle and able to help a lot of these patients that are kind of falling through the system.
Yeah, I mean, within the public discourse, the Robert Malones, Jay Bhattacharya, there's various other names, Pierre Corey's and etc. They're all very good. I mean, and this is kind of another part of this community. They're very, very good at talking about the problem, right? And because that's not talked about enough, what's going on with the mRNA platform, the myocarditis issues, the autoimmune issues. People like Pierre Corey, they were also big into, this isn't my area, but the whole ivermectin, repurposed drugs, hydroxychloroquine stuff. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but they've never talked about what you're talking about. And I wonder how amazing it could be. Again, if what you're saying is as amazing as it is, if we could like bridge, like if your content were to come more into the space of millions and millions of people, like it's really the space of people disenfranchised and disgruntled with what's happened with COVID, including a subset of people. Like I know for, in my audience and many audiences around me with different, on Substack and Rumble, a lot of these platforms, it's many people, like I said, disenfranchised by the COVID interventions, and some subset of them actually suffering from vaccine injuries. And they've never heard of what you're talking about. And there's so many.
I think there's millions of people. I don't know the exact number, but I'm pretty sure there's millions of people living with long COVID or vaccine injury or both. And these patients have no solution. So that's why this guy, this billionaire patient of mine, he's willing to fund a trial for us. So I hope it works out in the end. But I think once we start doing some of those larger controlled trials, then we can really show the mainstream medicine scientific community too. But I think like you said, getting on obviously talking to the right people, even with what we're doing now, can be very powerful because the results speak for themselves, right? Like you can't deny that this stuff works because it can't be placebo. You know what I mean? It's not, these patients have been suffering for years and years or for months, whatever. And it's not like you do the intervention and they get better, right? So it's kind of, I always say it's like a parachute. You don't need to do a randomized control trial to see if a parachute works or not, because you want to be in the placebo group for that. Like that wouldn't make any sense, right? So it's like you kind of, the results in the real world are very important to me, if not sometimes even more important than controlled trials, because if you have all these data sets of data points of so many people who reproducibly get better, that says a lot.
Right. And that's, Jordan and you guys are talking about, like, anecdotes are data too. They're data points, right? Now, obviously, that you can't rely on that only. So, like, obviously, like, you're relying on anecdotes, right? Like patients you've treated with these, and I assume, like, we're short on time now too, but like I assume you had some hypotheses. You were like, we could try this and try that.
Exactly. I'm an experimenter, and so until I found something that worked. So it's not like I arrived here, and I just was like one day that it took trial and error, and it took a while to get to these protocols and these approaches that we developed. And again, it wasn't just me. It was with scientists and other doctors and other clinicians I work with, and kind of put this stuff together.
So you experimented and things started working, and some things weren't working. Some were better than others.
Exactly.
So how confident are you in your current protocols or your general understanding?
When it comes to vaccine injury, I'm like, notwithstanding budget constraints, because these treatments are expensive, I'm 100% pretty much confident I can fix almost everyone, because it becomes a dosing thing. Because it's like, once you understand the principle is, let's say that immune dysregulation. Once you understand that principle, it's just about restoring it. And the only unknown factor right now is dose, which I don't know, and no one knows the answer to yet, is that sometimes people do need multiple treatments, but we have been able to get everyone better. Like that's just, with vaccine injuries and long COVID, that's becoming, and that's why it's becoming unfortunately, it's becoming a big part of my practice. I never wanted to be a vaccine injury doctor or like a long COVID doctor, but it's just kind of happening because these patients have nowhere else to go.
You said almost 100%. Like that's a pretty big claim. That's huge. Like you could be the leader of like that's insane.
Yeah, I think there's a reason. I think there's a reason why I have I probably interacted with 100. Maybe not 100, maybe 60 or 70 billionaires in the last few months, just because of the network of people I'm treating and the people I know and the people who are kind of circling around me and want to invest into me and want us to grow and all that stuff. I think people obviously see the potential in what we're doing, and so that's why we're rapidly expanding and all that stuff.
I just got to hit on this again. You said you've treated almost everyone successfully, like
when it comes to like COVID specifically. Injuries? Yeah. So again, I can't say because I don't know the answer to this, and I don't think anyone does. Like long COVID and vaccine injury can overlap, right? Like they can be, because sometimes we don't know which one's which, right? Like they could have got COVID and then that caused it, and then the vaccine made it worse, or vice versa. Like, and sometimes it's hard to discern. So I just kind of bunch them together, right? Because a lot of times they present similarly. in the sense that they have very similar symptoms. Obviously, there's obvious vaccine injury cases like we talked about, but sometimes it's complicated because sometimes it's both, right? They had long COVID, and then they got the vaccine, and then it got worse, right? And then so I've seen that too. But let's just say COVID-related issues. Yes, we've been able to get pretty much everyone better.
That's insane.
It's been life-changing for people, right? Like I've seen people who couldn't concentrate, they couldn't read, they couldn't exercise, they couldn't do anything, and then they get their life back. So it is obviously, very rewarding for me.
That's absolutely insane. And when you say almost everyone you've treated successfully, like they've gotten back to their life with their disabilities, because many people are disabled from.
Yeah, they're disabled. Exactly.
And then that's one of my follow. Like when you say everyone, like again, we spent so much time on this. We still won't be able to cover everything on this topic, but like some people like paralyzed from the COVID vaccine, severe neurological disorders.
I haven't had any paralyzed patients. The worst patient I had, actually, we posted his story on Instagram just last week, and he was the worst I've seen. I think he lost all his muscle. He's basically bedridden. He has chronic, like severe pain, like all over his body. He just feels sick every day. He obviously had to stop working, and he's probably the worst case I've seen. And he's already feeling better. It's only been 3-4 weeks. He has more energy. He's putting on muscle. He's eating again. And so it's only been a month. So.
And what condition is that? What would you call that?
It was again, long COVID vaccine injury. I don't.
What kind of vaccine injury? Like what condition? Is there like a diagnosis for that?
Well, it's the whole like immune dysregulation. He kind of had everything, right? He had palpitations, he had shortness of breath, he had brain fog, he had chronic pain, he had literally like every, you checkbox, like just everything. And he just couldn't do anything. He was disabled.
Wow. Okay. But you've, when you say you've treated almost everyone successfully, again,
and he's the worst case, and he's already improving. So like in a few months, we'll be able to update everyone, and hopefully he'll be back to work and functioning normally. That's the goal, obviously.
Right. Obviously we talk about myocarditis, but for autoimmune issues, there's some reproductive. I know I definitely can't open up a bunch of new stuff here, but like reproductive stuff, menstrual stuff. There's some issues. Like, is that on your radar at all? Potentially,
yeah. I'm working with her name is Victoria Falker, who's a really good scientist when it comes to reproductive, endocrinology and everything. And so, so she's seen, because she's the expert on this, and I've talked to her about it. So for sure, we've seen changes in many women since the vaccine when it comes to. I'm sure you know this as well, and I'm sure your audience does as well. And so, so yes, we've seen people being able to regulate their cycles and be able to improve their fertility health with our treatments as well. Yeah.
Really? Wow. Yeah. Again, this is absolutely insane. Like what you're saying, like this is not talked about enough. Like no one's talking about this in mainstream. Well, like no one's talking about this in mainstream spaces. Obviously, no one's talking about this on CNN or the FDA roundtables, but no one's talking about this even in the dissident or disenfranchised community. There's a lot of discussion of the problem. Obviously, many people in my audience alone that know someone, I know people with vaccine injuries, but no one has ever talked about what we're talking about.
No, exactly. Exactly. It's been, and that's why I'm glad I got, Tony Robbins is a good patient of mine now, and he's opening up a lot of doors for me and connecting me with a lot of people. And I'm glad he is, because he's I'm sure he was very against the vaccine during the whole pandemic. And I
didn't actually know that. Okay.
He was very open about it. So he made a lot of videos, and me and him get along well. And I think having him as a really good support for me and connecting me with people will really open up a lot of hopefully channels to get the word out about how we can help these people. Because to me, it's not, for me, it's not about anything else except helping these people get back to a normal life. That's what matters the most, and raising awareness, because the institutions that are supposed to be able to help and protect these people, like Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, like the ones that people think are the top institutions, they don't do anything for these patients. They give them there's like a drug that they give them, like fluvoxamine or something, and it's just it doesn't work very well, and like that's all they have to offer them. Like it's kind of sad.
Yeah, I guess two broad questions you can handle any way you want in the last couple minutes, but I guess just like when it comes to the range of conditions, like myocarditis, we touched briefly on the menstrual reproductive stuff. What other kind of conditions have you treated, just generally speaking? Like autoimmune stuff.
I guess since we're talking about vaccine injury, I mean, I think the chronic, I think it's important, the kidney stuff, right? We've seen a lot of people with IgA nephropathy and, kidney issues that only happened after they got the vaccine. And so we do stem cell injections directly into the kidney for that and the systemic treatments as well. And
it works
to help. Yeah. And we're able to get them back to, where they were. And that's the whole idea, right? It was restoring their function. Now for kidneys, it's complicated, right? Because if you're on dialysis, and unfortunately, like that lady I had today, she had the vaccine and now she's on dialysis, but it's also because she went through the medical system for 2 years and no one recommended anything to her. If I saw her 2 years ago, we probably could have helped her, but now she's so far gone, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to help her, because she's on dialysis. Like it's probably too late. But obviously it is tragic because it was literally like 2 doses of the vaccine, and literally a few weeks later, her kidney started failing.
That's absolutely insane. There's no amount of repudiation or condemnation we can express for people in power that were doing these kind of things.
Well, it's unfair to tell people there was no risk, right? And I think that's what we realize now. There was a reason for certain people to get it, but it's informed consent. Informed consent is the basics of medicine. Like you just tell people that there might be some harm with this that we don't fully understand, and that's it. Like it's a very simple thing to have done, and then we could have avoided some of these very tragic situations that patients are in now.
Right, and yeah, when it comes to risk, and I assume you know this, the best peer-reviewed analysis by Freeman and colleagues, I've had him on the podcast, showed the 1 in 800 serious adverse event ratio. I assume you've seen that paper. That's probably
that's
the best
specifically, but
you should check it. That's the best paper on serious adverse event rates. So 1 in 800, according to this analysis published in the journal Vaccine. Peter Doshi, John Greenland, if I'm saying that right, and a few other individuals, Stanford, UCLA, Joseph Raymond, who I've interviewed, they authored the analysis from Pfizer and Moderna's own trials, showing 1 in 800, where other vaccines, it's 1 per million, 1 per 10 million, right? But this one had 1 in 800.
Order of magnitude difference.
So you should check. Okay, before we go quickly, is there any preliminary data on this that you can send me or we can show people? And number 2, is anyone else doing this other than you when it comes to vaccine injuries? Those are
Well, I mean, a lot of these are protocols that I've developed with some of my clinicians. So right now they're, I guess, unique to us. There are other doctors doing, I would say, similar type of things. I don't know if anyone has the reproducible results that we have, just because we have some unique technology. For example, the follistatin gene therapy, the plasmid vector. We also have been using that for a lot of our COVID patients, because long COVID or vaccine, because a lot of them lose muscle and a lot of them get chronic fatigue. So that's something only we have right now. So obviously we are publishing to your point, we're in the process of putting together a lot of these case reports, and we're going to publish them. Hopefully like at least half a dozen or something, just to show some preliminary evidence of the promise of these combined approach for vaccine injury and long COVID.
Right. Because there is going to be a faction of people, mainstream, but also dissident or contrarian, who only are going to rely on, they only want randomized controlled trials like that. They're not going to be particularly convinced maybe from.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think the reality is, though, these patients have no other options, and I'm trying to help them with the best available evidence and with what I can do, right? So as opposed to just shrugging my shoulders and being like, oh, well, I can't do anything for you. So if I didn't try to help them, a lot of these patients' lives would never be changed. So to me, it's just about being able to make a difference, and it's up to people to believe it or not, but that's what we do.
Yeah, and again, safety profile for these peptides and stem cells are
very high. Yeah, they all have they're all very safe. That's
any major adverse events, any particular like major issues, like even
nothing,
if they're rare?
Nothing. The worst case scenario is like they might have like a fever, nausea, headache for a couple of days, and then
that's worst case. Worst case.
Yeah.
Really?
So an immune response, and it's acute and self-limited. So nothing
That's
more
it.
than that.
No,
there's always a theoretical risk of infection or bleeding, right? But I mean, we've never had an infection to date, knock on wood. But obviously, we take every risk to mitigate that. But other than that, no other real risk. Yeah.
No long term issues.
No.
Yeah. This is crazy, man. My mind is blown from this podcast. You and I are going to be in touch, I think, after this. I know you got to go. Thanks so much for doing this, man. My audience is going to absolutely love this. This is incredible. I'm gonna try and put out your message. Like my audience, they're gonna eat this up. I'm gonna post about it. So hopefully we'll get people talking about this. But let's talk more offline, and we can figure out ways to
bring
get
your friend
message
in.
out.
We'll get a story. I think it'll be a great story.
And it might even be cool to plug you in, like have you in a podcast with like the Robert Malone or Jay. Maybe that would be interesting potentially, because these people, they may not know much about your stuff. Like that'd be cool.
Yeah, the interventional stuff.
Having you talk to some of these leading scientists and you maybe have a conversation with someone like a Robert Malone. He's going to come on the pod again and talk about some stuff like that. Could be, there's some stuff we can talk about to figure out more ways to get the message out. All right. Thanks so much, man. We didn't get to any of my questions about the other stuff about, stuff outside of vaccine injuries, which was absolutely not the focus of this conversation beforehand, but I'm so glad we did this. And I'm really excited to get your message out, and to any number of people who I know are still struggling from these issues. We can figure out a way. We'll talk more after about linking to your stuff and ways people can reach out and talk to you or go to your clinic. We can talk more, and I'll put in the description what it would look like for people to reach out, or I guess they have to fly out, I guess, to Toronto. Okay.
They can book a consultation and go from there. Yeah.
And it's what, Toronto is the home base?
Eterna.health is our website. We do most of our consultations virtually now, just because we treat people all over the world. So
Well, would people normally have to fly out to your place?
Yes, usually depending, if I treat people in Europe, I treat people in Dubai, I treat people in Mexico, and I'm also treating people in Tokyo in the summer. So I'm all over the place.
Right. Okay. But generally, if someone living in Utah or BC, like they'd have to fly over to you, obviously.
They usually fly to Cabo. Is the most common place for the North American patients. Yeah.
So, sorry, where?
Cabo, Los Cabos in Mexico. We have a clinic over there. Yeah.
Okay, right. So you're Toronto
because of regulation here, we can't do a lot of the stuff here, right?
Right. Oh, so you're treating all your vaccine injuries in Cabo?
Yeah.
That's all.
North American
Okay.
patients.
Wow. Oh, so you can't do that in Toronto at your Toronto clinic? No. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, man. I got more questions, but we'll postpone this.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much.
Has the dust settled from the COVID policy response? Far from it. The storms are many. Inflation, learning losses, ill health, high crime, broken government services, displaced workers, substance abuse, mass loneliness, discredited science, real estate crisis, censorship, and overweening state power. The world is on fire with war, mass killings, crime, hunger, revolution. The lack of accountability, or even so much as an apology, is a foreshadowing. They'll keep their newfound powers and try it all again. Brownstone Institute is seeking answers, undertaking important research and publishing the results while providing fellowships for dissident scholars who have been professionally displaced. It's not about this one crisis. We urgently need to restore peace, prosperity, and integrity in science and journalism. Visit brownstone.org for more. We may never get to the truth, but we can get closer to the truth. There will be no stopping the efforts.